Hey warriors, there is a fire you have been avoiding lighting because you know exactly what it will burn. It will burn the excuses you have kept warm for years. It will burn the comfortable story where circumstances did this to you instead of your own choices. It will burn the soft, apologetic posture you have carried into every room where you actually wanted something and pretended you did not. Light it today, not next month. Not after one more sign, not after you feel brave enough, because bravery has never once shown up before the fire. It shows up because of it. You keep treating change like it needs your approval before it starts. It does not. Change is already happening to you constantly, whether you steer it or not, through every habit you repeat without questioning it, every excuse you accept without checking if it is even true. The only real choice you get is whether you drive that change on purpose or keep getting dragged by it while calling the dragging a plan. Stop calling it a plan. Grab the wheel. Notice how comfortable you have become at explaining yourself. Every unfinished project has a reason attached to it. Every broken promise to yourself has a story that makes it sound reasonable instead of what it actually is, which is a choice you made repeatedly to protect comfort over growth. You are fluent in your own excuses. You could recite them in your sleep. That fluency has cost you more than any actual obstacle you have ever faced, because an excuse rehearsed enough times stops sounding like an excuse and starts sounding like a fact about who you are. It is not a fact. It is a habit. And habits can be broken the same way they were built, through repetition in the opposite direction. Stop asking whether today is the right day. There is no right day waiting somewhere ahead of you, fully formed and free of obstacles, ready to make this easy. Every single person who ever built something real started on a day that felt just as inconvenient, just as poorly timed, just as unready as today feels to you right now. The day was never the problem. The waiting was. Epictetus taught that freedom has nothing to do with your circumstances and everything to do with what you do with your own will. A man can chain your leg. He cannot chain your judgment unless you hand it over willingly. Look at how much of your life right now is spent waiting for permission, waiting for the right boss, the right relationship, the right bank balance, before you finally let yourself act like the person you claim you want to be. That waiting is the chain. You put it there yourself, and you are the only one who can take it off. Think about how much of your day gets handed over to things you cannot control. The traffic, the delayed reply, the opinion of someone whose name you will forget within a year. You spend real energy, real attention, real emotional bandwidth on outcomes that were never yours to determine in the first place, while the one thing that was always fully yours, your response, your effort, your next move, gets left running on autopilot in the background. Reverse that ratio. Spend your energy on the one lever you actually control and let everything else fall where it falls. Ask yourself honestly, right now, what permission you have been waiting for that nobody was ever actually going to hand you. Write it in the comments before you keep going. Most people never even name the permission they are waiting for. It stays vague on purpose, because naming it would mean admitting how long they have been standing still for something that was never coming. Say it out loud, or type it out plainly, and notice how small it actually looks once it is stated directly, instead of hiding behind a general feeling of not being ready yet. I take my own permission. You are not behind schedule. There is no schedule. That is a fiction other people built to sell you their pace as the correct one, and you bought it, and now you punish yourself daily for not matching a timeline that was never real in the first place. Burn that fiction along with the rest. The only timeline that matters is the one you actually control, starting from wherever you are standing right now, not from some imaginary point you think you should have already reached. Seneca warned that people spend their days as if an endless supply were coming, guarding money fiercely while handing out hours to anyone who asks for them. You do this constantly without noticing. You give your best hours to scrolling, to rehearsing arguments that never happened, to worrying about things you cannot touch, and then you wonder why the work that actually matters never gets the energy it needs. Hours are not renewable. Spend them like it. Look at your last 7 days honestly. Count the hours that built something and the hours that simply disappeared. That number will tell you more about your actual priorities than anything you have ever said out loud about what matters to you. Tell me the biggest thief of your time this past week, the one you already know the answer to before you even finish reading this. I spend my hours on purpose. Every obstacle you are avoiding right now is not blocking your path. It is your path. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way forward once you stop treating it as an interruption and start treating it as the actual material you are meant to work with. You have been waiting for a clear road before you start moving, and there has never been a clear road for anyone who ended up building something that lasted. The obstacle is not in front of the work, it is the work. Think about the last time something difficult actually happened to you. Not the story you tell people about it now, softened and packaged for sympathy, but what actually happened in the moment, the fear, the confusion, the part where you almost gave up. You did not give up. You are here. That means you already have proof, direct and undeniable, that you can move through difficulty and come out the other side functioning. Stop acting like you have never done this before. You have. You just forgot to give yourself credit for it. Every setback you have ever faced taught you something you would never have learned from a smooth, uneventful path. The friction is not punishment. It is instruction, delivered in a language most people refuse to sit still long enough to actually learn. Stop treating difficulty as a sign you took a wrong turn. Sometimes difficulty is simply the toll charged at the entrance of anything worth reaching, and refusing to pay it does not get you there for free. It just means you never get there at all. Consider how differently you would treat obstacles if you actually believed all the way through that each one was sharpening something rather than punishing you. Most people flinch at the first sign of resistance because they interpret it as a verdict on whether they should be doing this at all. Reinterpret it instead as information about exactly where your current capacity ends, and treat that edge as the precise location where the actual growth happens. Nothing sharpens against a surface with no friction. Name the hardest thing you have already survived, the one that proves you are more capable than the excuses you have been making lately. I move through it. Talking about virtue and living it are two entirely different exercises, and only one of them costs you anything. Musonius Rufus insisted that philosophy meant nothing if it stayed in the realm of clever talk and never touched the actual conduct of a life. He pushed his students toward real discomfort, real labor, real tests, because a person who has only ever discussed discipline in theory has no discipline at all, just vocabulary. You know this pattern in yourself. You can explain exactly what you should be doing. You have read the right things, watched the right content, nodded along at the right moments. None of that has moved you an inch. Only the doing moves you. Stop consuming more material about the change you want to make. You already have more than enough information to start today. What you are missing is not another insight, another framework, another breakdown of the science behind habit formation. What you are missing is the willingness to do the uncomfortable thing right now with the knowledge you already possess, instead of collecting more knowledge as a socially acceptable way to keep delaying. Notice the specific feeling of relief that comes from opening one more article or one more video instead of starting the actual task. That relief is the trap. It feels like progress because it borrows the same emotional signature as genuine forward motion, but it produces nothing beyond a slightly larger pile of information you already had enough of an hour ago. There is a specific kind of person who has watched 100 hours of content about discipline and practiced none of it. And that person always mistakes the watching for the doing because the watching feels productive, feels like progress, feels like effort spent in the right direction. It is not. It is a comfortable substitute wearing the costume of preparation. The gap between knowing and doing is the only gap that has ever actually mattered, and it is the one gap most people spend their entire lives avoiding by staying busy on the knowing side of it. Tell me one thing you already know you should be doing that you have been researching instead of simply starting. I do instead of discuss. Standing your ground when it costs you something is the only test of conviction that actually means anything. Cato held his position against the most powerful men in Rome, knowing the cost, refusing to trade his principles for an easier path, because a principle that only survives when it is convenient was never a principle to begin with. It was a preference wearing a stronger word. You claim certain things matter to you. Test that claim the next time holding your position actually costs you something, a relationship, a comfortable silence, an easy exit. If the claim survives the cost, it was real. If it collapses the moment it becomes inconvenient, you already have your answer about what you actually value. People will test you on this, sometimes without meaning to. They will push back the moment you stop being agreeable, stop being the person who never inconvenienced anyone. Some of them will call it a phase. Let them. A person who only stands firm when no one is pushing has never actually been tested, and untested conviction is worth exactly nothing the moment real pressure arrives. Most people discover what they actually believe only under pressure, never before it, because pressure is the only honest audit anyone ever gets. Everything you claim to value while life is calm is a hypothesis. It only becomes a fact about you once it survives contact with an actual cost. Stop assuming you know your own principles just because you can describe them fluently in comfortable conditions. Wait for the moment it costs you something and watch what you actually do. That is the only real measure of truth that counts. Tell me the last time your convictions actually cost you something, and if you cannot think of one, ask yourself honestly whether you have any convictions at all or just preferences you have never had to defend. I hold my ground. Your feelings are not verdicts. They are weather, passing through, loud and convincing while they last and gone an hour later, and you have been treating every storm as a permanent forecast for your entire life. Chrysippus argued that emotional turmoil comes from faulty judgment, from mistaking a passing impression for settled truth. The wave of doubt that hits you before a hard decision is not a message from some deeper wisdom. It is often just your nervous system reacting to unfamiliar territory. Nothing more. Feel it, note it. Do not obey it automatically, as though it were the final word on what you should do next. Practice separating the feeling from the fact the next time panic or doubt shows up uninvited. Ask what is actually, provably true right now, in this exact moment, stripped of the story your mind is racing to attach to it. Most of the time the fact is far smaller and far more manageable than the feeling made it seem. The gap between the two is where all your unnecessary suffering has been hiding. You have probably noticed by now that the feeling always arrives first and the interpretation follows right behind it, dressed up to look like reasoning when it is really just the feeling defending itself. Slow that sequence down. Let a few seconds pass between the wave hitting you and the conclusion you draw from it. In that small gap is the only real freedom you get, the freedom to choose your response instead of simply reacting on autopilot the way you have for years. What feeling convinced you of something false recently, something that turned out to not even be true once you actually checked it against reality? I separate fact from feeling. Reputation built quietly outlasts reputation performed loudly, every single time, no exceptions. Cleanthes worked through the night hauling water just to fund his own education, mocked by people who thought manual labor beneath a serious student of philosophy, and he never once stopped to defend himself against the mockery. He simply kept working. Eventually the results made the mockery irrelevant, because results have a way of settling arguments that words never could. You are spending too much energy right now defending your effort to people who were never going to be convinced by an explanation. Stop explaining. Start producing. Let the outcome argue your case instead of your mouth. There is a specific kind of quiet confidence that only comes from work nobody applauded while it was happening. You cannot fake that confidence, and you cannot borrow it from anyone else's story. It has to be earned in the exact currency it demands, which is unglamorous repetition performed without a crowd for long enough that the results eventually speak on their own without needing your commentary attached. Think about how much time you have spent crafting the explanation instead of doing the thing the explanation was supposed to justify. The energy spent defending your pace, your method, your timeline to people who will forget the exchange within a week could have gone directly into the work itself. Redirect it there instead. Nobody who ever built something that mattered spent equal time building it and narrating the building of it to skeptics. They chose one. Choose the same one. The mockery you fear right now, if it ever actually arrives, will not last nearly as long as you expect it to. People forget what they laughed at far faster than you remember being laughed at. Stop protecting yourself from a moment of embarrassment that will be irrelevant within a month, at the cost of years of progress you never allowed yourself to make because you were too busy avoiding a look on someone's face. Tell me one piece of work you have been doing that nobody has noticed yet, and commit to continuing it anyway. I let the work speak. Losing everything is sometimes the only way anyone ever actually starts over completely, instead of half-heartedly patching the same old structure. Zeno lost his entire cargo in a shipwreck, walked away from the wreckage with nothing left to protect, and built an entirely new life out of that loss instead of spending years mourning what the sea took. He later said it was his best voyage because the wreck forced a total rebuild instead of another round of small repairs on something that was never going to hold. If something in your life has already collapsed, a relationship, a plan, an identity you had been leaning on, stop treating the collapse as proof you are finished. Treat it as the one thing that finally cleared enough space for something real to get built. You cannot renovate your way out of a foundation that was rotten from the start. Some structures need to come all the way down before anything solid can go up in their place, and the fact that yours came down does not mean you failed. It might mean you were finally freed from something that was never going to hold your weight anyway. Grief over what collapsed is allowed. Staying in the grief past its natural point is a choice, not a requirement. There is a specific moment where mourning the loss stops teaching you anything new and simply becomes a comfortable excuse to avoid the harder work of building something in its place. Notice when you cross that line. The wreckage is not sacred. It is simply the material lying on the ground, waiting for you to decide whether you are going to use it or keep standing in the middle of it indefinitely, treating the standing itself as some kind of accomplishment. Tell me what already collapsed in your life that you have not yet let yourself use as the clean start it actually was. I build from the wreckage. Needing less is a kind of power almost nobody bothers to develop, because acquiring more feels so much easier to chase and so much easier to show off. Diogenes stripped his life down to almost nothing on purpose, refusing comfort most people consider non-negotiable, because he wanted to prove exactly how little a person actually requires in order to think clearly and live according to reason. He famously told the most powerful man in the world to simply step out of his light, unimpressed by a power that could not touch anything Diogenes had already secured within himself. Notice how much of your stress right now traces back to things you have convinced yourself you need but do not. The approval, the upgrade, the image. Strip enough of it away, and what remains is far sturdier than what you started with. You do not need the audience you think you need. You do not need the validation you keep checking for like a reflex. Test this. Go 1 full week without seeking a single form of external approval for anything you accomplish, and notice how much steadier you feel by the end of it, once the constant checking finally stops. Look closely at how much of your monthly effort goes toward maintaining an image instead of building actual capability. The two get confused constantly because they can look identical from a distance, but only one of them survives contact with a real test. An image collapses the moment circumstances stop cooperating with it. Capability does not care what circumstances look like. Choose to spend your limited energy building the thing that holds up under pressure, instead of the thing that only ever looked good while nothing was actually being tested. The less you require from your surroundings to feel stable, the less power any single circumstance holds over your entire day. Most people have built a life so dependent on a dozen small external conditions lining up correctly that one bad morning is enough to derail everything. Build the opposite. Build a stability that does not ask permission from the weather, the traffic, or a stranger's opinion before it shows up. Name one thing you have convinced yourself you need that you could actually live without starting today. I need less than I think. Character was never something fixed at birth, locked into place before you ever had a say in the matter. Epictetus argued that virtue could be taught, built deliberately, the same way any skill gets built, through repetition and correction over time. If that is true, then whatever weakness you have been calling a permanent part of your nature is not permanent at all. It is simply unpracticed. You have practiced the excuse 1,000 times, which is why it comes so easily. You have not practiced the discipline nearly as often, which is why it still feels foreign and uncomfortable. That discomfort is not proof discipline is not for you. It is proof you are early in the repetitions required to make it feel natural. Stop waiting to become a different kind of person before you start acting like one. The order runs the other way. You act first, inconsistently at the start, badly some days, and the identity catches up to the behavior over time, not the reverse. Nobody has ever felt like a disciplined person before they started behaving like one repeatedly. Consider how much of your self-description right now is actually just a summary of old repetitions, not a fixed law of your nature. You call yourself someone who cannot stick to things because you have not stuck to things, not because sticking to things is genuinely beyond you. Change the repetitions and the summary changes with them, slowly at first, then completely, the same way any pattern shifts. Once enough new evidence overwhelms the old story. Start generating the new evidence today instead of continuing to confirm the old story out of pure habit. Tell me the trait you have written off as just how you are, and consider, honestly, whether you have actually given yourself a real chance to build the opposite. I build what I practice. You are going to spend a great deal of this process completely alone, and you need to make peace with that now instead of being surprised by it later. Not because people abandon you, though some will, but because the actual labor of rebuilding a character only happens in the privacy of your own decisions, made when nobody is checking, kept when nobody would ever know if you broke them. A crowd cannot do that part for you. A coach cannot do that part for you. The people who love you most cannot do that part for you, no matter how much they want to. This single piece of the work belongs entirely to you, and trying to outsource it is how most people spend years feeling like they are changing while nothing underneath actually moves. This is not a call to cut everyone off or treat solitude as some permanent state you are supposed to live in forever. It is a call to stop needing witnesses for the parts of the process that were never going to have any. The early morning nobody saw, The temptation you turned down that no one will ever know you turned down. The hard choice you made in a completely empty room with absolutely nothing to gain from anyone else finding out about it. That private, unwitnessed effort is worth more than anything you have ever done in front of an audience, because it was built for you and only you, and nothing about its value depends on anyone else confirming it happened. Notice how uncomfortable real solitude actually makes you. Most people fill every quiet moment with noise, a notification, a scroll, a call, precisely because silence forces you to sit with your own thoughts without a distraction to hide behind. That discomfort is not a sign something is wrong with you. It is a sign you have spent years avoiding exactly the kind of reflection this work requires. Sit in the discomfort instead of reaching for the escape hatch. The answers you have been searching for outside yourself were mostly waiting in the silence you kept refusing to sit inside of. You will also notice, the further into this you get, that the people most threatened by your change are rarely your enemies. They are often the people closest to you, the ones who built their own comfort around who you used to be, a person who no longer exists in the same shape. That is not always malice on their part. Sometimes it is simply fear of losing a familiar dynamic they never asked to have disrupted. Understand that and hold no bitterness toward it, but do not let their discomfort talk you out of continuing. Their adjustment period is not your responsibility to manage at the expense of your own progress. Tell me one part of this process you have been trying to do with an audience that you now realize needs to happen alone instead. I do this alone. Stop measuring your progress against a timeline that belongs to someone else entirely. You look sideways constantly at people who started earlier, who had more support, who caught a lucky break you never got, and you use their head start as proof that starting now is pointless for you. It is not proof of anything except where you decided to point your attention. The only comparison that has ever meant anything is between who you were a year ago and who you are choosing to become starting today. And that comparison has nothing to do with anyone else's pace, resources, or timing. Every time you check someone else's progress instead of adding to your own, you are spending a finite resource on a number that changes nothing about your actual position. That habit feels productive because it activates the same part of your brain that genuine planning does. But it produces nothing, moves nothing forward, and mostly just leaves you discouraged before you have even started your own work for the day. Close the tab. Redirect the attention. The only scoreboard that matters is the one tracking your own follow-through. Understand also that the people you are comparing yourself to rarely show you the actual cost of what they built. You see the outcome, polished and edited, and measure it against your own unfinished, messy middle, which is an unfair fight rigged against you from the start. Everyone's middle looks like yours, uncertain, slow, occasionally embarrassing. The only difference between the people who eventually arrive somewhere and the people who quietly give up is whether they kept going through that exact same uncertain middle instead of assuming everyone else skipped it. Stop treating rest as failure, and stop treating exhaustion as proof of commitment. Real discipline includes recovery, deliberately, on purpose, the same way it includes effort. What it does not include is collapsing into avoidance and calling it rest, because the label sounds better than admitting you quit for the day. Know the difference. One restores you for tomorrow's work. The other quietly erodes the standard you just set. And erosion is patient. It does not announce itself. It simply waits until one day you look up and the standard is gone entirely, without a single dramatic moment marking the exact point where it slipped away. Tell me the last time you compared your unfinished middle to someone else's finished outcome, and whether that comparison actually told you anything true. I run my own race. Here is what almost nobody tells you honestly before you start this kind of work. Most days will not feel significant while they are happening. There will be no dramatic turning point you can point to later, just an accumulation of ordinary mornings where you did the harder thing instead of the easier one, quietly, without an audience, without a moment that felt like it belonged in a highlight reel. That is not a flaw in the process. That is the entire process. Anyone selling you an idea of change that feels constantly dramatic is selling you something that will not survive contact with an actual ordinary Tuesday, and most of your life is made of ordinary Tuesdays. Expect resistance from inside your own head before you expect it from anywhere else. The most convincing argument against doing the hard thing will not come from a critic standing across from you. It will come from your own mind, dressed up as caution, offering perfectly reasonable-sounding excuses to wait one more day. Recognize that voice immediately the next time it shows up. It has been winning against you for years, not because its arguments are strong, but because you have never once challenged them out loud. Build evidence for yourself on purpose. Every time you follow through on something small when skipping it would have been easy and unnoticed, you are collecting proof for the next moment doubt tries to talk you out of something bigger. Stack enough of that proof, and doubt starts losing the argument before it even finishes making its case. Confidence was never a feeling you wait around for. It is a verdict, built from a track record only you have witnessed firsthand. Stop mistaking a single burst of intense effort for actual consistency. A dramatic week followed by a month of nothing will never outperform a smaller, steadier effort repeated without fail for a long stretch of ordinary days. Most people chase the dramatic approach because it looks impressive for a single afternoon. Choose the boring approach that actually compounds instead. There is a specific kind of freedom waiting for you once this stops being a performance and simply becomes what you do. Not the freedom to do whatever you want whenever the mood strikes, but the freedom that comes from no longer negotiating with yourself every single morning about whether today is the day you finally follow through. That negotiation ends. The decision gets made once, in advance, and everything after that is simply execution, unremarkable, repeated, and far more valuable than it looks from the outside. Understand that this standard, once you actually build it, does not stay fixed in place. It rises. The discipline that feels demanding today will feel almost automatic a year from now, and the moment it does, the bar moves higher again, because growth was never a destination you arrive at and then rest inside of permanently. It is a direction you keep walking, and the walking itself becomes the identity, not any single milestone along the way. Stop looking for the finish line. There is not one. There is only the next stage of the standard, slightly higher than the last, waiting for you the moment you get comfortable with where you currently stand. Watch out for the specific trap of celebrating too early. The first sign of progress feels enormous after a long stretch of nothing, and it is tempting to treat that first win as proof the work is basically done. It is not. It is proof the direction is correct, nothing more. Keep walking in that direction well past the point where it stops feeling exciting and starts feeling routine, because routine is exactly where the real gains accumulate, quietly, without fanfare, long after anyone stopped paying attention to whether you were still going. Picture, specifically, who you become if you actually hold this standard for a full year without breaking the first time it gets difficult. Not someone with no bad days, no setbacks, no moments of doubt, but someone who shows up anyway on the days it would have been easy not to, because showing up stopped being optional the day the decision was made. That person is not luckier than you. That person is not more talented than you. That person simply stopped negotiating with the same excuses you are still negotiating with, one ordinary day at a time, until the refusal to quit became automatic instead of effortful. Now picture the opposite. Picture yourself a year from today having changed nothing, still explaining the same excuses with slightly more practiced language, still waiting for a condition that was never going to arrive on its own. That outcome is available to you as well. It is, in fact, the default outcome if you close this and let the feeling fade without acting on any of it, the way you have let similar moments fade 100 times before. The only thing standing between those two outcomes is the very next choice you make once this ends, not next week, not tomorrow, right now. Tell me, honestly, in the comments, what tomorrow looks like if you actually follow through on everything you have just heard instead of letting it fade by the time you close this. I follow through. The fire is already lit. What happens next has nothing to do with permission, an audience, or the right conditions finally lining up in your favor. It has to do with the next choice you make the moment this ends, alone, in whatever room you are standing in right now. Make it count. Understand that nobody is going to check whether you actually did any of this. There is no accountability system built into hearing these words, no follow-up calls scheduled to ask if you kept your word to yourself. That absence of enforcement is not a weakness in the process. It is the entire test. Anyone can hold a standard when someone else is watching to make sure they do. The only standard that has ever built real character is the one you keep when the only person who would ever know is you. So, decide right now, before the momentum of this moment fades the way it always has before, exactly what the next 24 hours look like if you actually meant everything you just agreed with. Not a vague intention to try harder in general. One specific action, small enough to actually complete, hard enough that skipping it would be a real choice rather than an accident. Do that one thing today, then do the next one tomorrow. The fire does not need to be dramatic to keep burning. It only needs to keep getting fed, one ordinary log at a time, for longer than you have ever managed before.